Footnotes. Footnote 1. Cf. J. Baudrillard, L'Ordre des Simulacres, The Order of Simulacra, in L'échange symbolique et la mort, Symbolic Exchange and Death, Paris, Gallimard, 1976. Footnote 2. A discourse that is itself not susceptible to being resolved in transference. It is the entanglement of these two discourses that renders psychoanalysis interminable. Footnote 3. Cf. Perniola, Ignace, Visions, Simulacres, Icons, Visions, Simulacra, 39. Footnote 4. This does not necessarily result in despairing of meaning, but just as much in the improvisation of meaning, of non-meaning, of many simultaneous meanings that destroy each other. Footnote 5. Taken together, the energy crisis and the ecological mise en scène are themselves a disaster movie, in the same style, and with the same value, as those that currently comprise the golden days of Hollywood. It is useless to laboriously interpret these films in terms of their relation to an objective social crisis or even to an objective phantasm of disaster. It is in another sense that it must be said that it is the social itself that, in contemporary discourse, is organized along the lines of a disaster movie script. Cf. M. Macarius Louisiana Strategique de la Catastrophe, The Strategy of Disaster, 115. Footnote 6. To this flagging investment in work corresponds a parallel decline in the investment in consumption. Goodbye to use value or to the prestige of the automobile, goodbye amorous discourses that neatly oppose the object of enjoyment to the object of work. Another discourse takes hold that is a discourse of work on the object of consumption aiming for an active, constraining, Puritan reinvestment, use less gas, watch out for your safety, you've gone over the speed limit, etc., to which the characteristics of automobiles pretend to adapt. Rediscovering a stake through the transposition of these two poles. Work becomes the object of a need, the car becomes the object of work. There is no better proof of the lack of differentiation among all the stakes. It is through the same slippage between the right to vote and electoral duty that the divestment of the political sphere is signaled. Footnote 7. The medium/message confusion is certainly a corollary of that between the sender and the receiver, thus sealing the disappearance of all dual, polar structures that form the discursive organization of language, of all determined articulation of meaning reflecting Jacobson's famous grid of functions. That discourse circulates is to be taken literally, that is, it no longer goes from one point to another, but it traverses a cycle that without distinction includes the positions of transmitter and receiver, now unlocatable as such. Thus there is no instance of power, no instance of transmission. Power is something that circulates and whose source can no longer be located, a cycle in which the positions of the dominator and the dominated are exchanged in an endless reversion that is also the end of power in its classical definition. The circularization of power, of knowledge, of discourse puts an end to any localization of instances and poles. In the psychoanalytic interpretation itself, the power of the interpreter does not come from any outside instance but from the interpreted himself. This changes everything, because one can always ask of the traditional holders of power where they get their power from. Who made you duke? The king. Who made you king? God. Only God no longer answers. But to the question, who made you a psychoanalyst? The analyst can well reply, you. Thus is expressed, by an inverse simulation, the passage from the analyzed to the analysand, from passive to active, which simply describes the spiraling effect of the shifting of poles, the effect of circularity in which power is lost, is dissolved, is resolved in perfect manipulation. It is no longer of the order of directive power and of the gaze, but of the order of tactility and commutation. See also the state/family circularity assured by the fluctuation and metastatic regulation of the images of the social and the private. J. Donzelot Louisiana Police Day/Emils, the policing of families. Impossible now to pose the famous question, from what position do you speak? How do you know? From where do you get your power? Without hearing the immediate response, but it is of you, from you, that I speak, meaning, it is you who are speaking, you who know, you who are the power. Gigantic circumvolution, circumlocution of the spoken word, which is equal to a blackmail with no end, to a deterrence that cannot be appealed of the subject presumed to speak, leaving him without a reply, because to the question that he poses one ineluctably replies, but you are the answer, or, your question is already an answer, etc. The whole strangulatory sophistication of intercepting speech, of the forced confession in the guise of freedom of expression, of trapping the subject in his own interrogation, of the procession of the reply to the question, all the violence of interpretation lies there, as well as that of the conscious or unconscious management of the spoken word, parole. This simulacrum of the inversion or the involution of poles, this clever subterfuge, which is the secret of the whole discourse of manipulation and thus, today, in every domain, the secret of any new power in the erasure of the scene of power, in the assumption of all words from which has resulted this fantastic silent majority characteristic of our time. All of this started without a doubt in the political sphere with the democratic simulacrum, which today is the substitution for the power of God with the power of the people as the source of power, and of power as emanation with power as representation. Anti-Copernican revolution, no transcendental instance either of the sun or of the luminous sources of power and knowledge, everything comes from the people and everything returns to them. It is with this magnificent recycling that the universal simulacrum of manipulation, from the scenario of mass suffrage to the present-day phantoms of opinion polls, begins to be put in place. Footnote 8. PIP is an acronym for smallest possible gap, or plus petty cart possible. Footnote 9. Paradox, all bombs are clean, their only pollution is the system of security and of control they radiate as long as they don't explode. End of chapter.